who is on the board of directors with the Autism Society of Central Illinois, and she's also the parent of a son with, how old is?
12.
A 12-year-old son with autism. She's going to tell her personal story.
Thank you.
Woo-hoo!
Thank you, Suzanne. First of all, thank you to the Targeting Autism Forum, to all of you for this commitment to be here and for inviting me here to speak, and to Russ, who a year ago said, hey, I'm on this Targeting Autism Forum thing, and here's some information about it, and if you want to get involved, you might enjoy it. And I thought, sure, libraries and autism sounds great. I have no idea how those two things are going to connect, but I know that my kids have used libraries, and I know that I have at least one diagnosed with autism. So that's how it all began last year. I was able to be a part of this great forum, and I'm excited to be back this year. I'm not an expert at anything. When Suzanne and Russ approached me about speaking, I was extremely hesitant. Being someone who compares and contrasts myself to other people and other stories that I've heard, I said, what could I possibly bring? What value could I add to this conference? Well, I can tell you the one thing I'm an expert at, and that's my story. That's all any one of us is really an expert at, is our story. And I believe in the value of our story, and I believe in the value of listening. Thank you, Sarah. I believe in the value of making connections, building relationships, and leveraging those connections. Humanity is very powerful. Every one of us in this room has a personal story and a personal journey. And you never know at what moment in life your words, your actions, your kind thoughts, your lovingness, your openness, your generosity could touch someone else. So with that, I'm going to offer my personal story, and then a recent story that happened that kind of brings us home, and commission you all to do the same. As Suzanne said, I am the mother of one child with Asperger's, Gerard. I'm the mother of 4 children. Mike is 20, Ignatius is 16, Philomena is 14, and Gerard is the diagnosed autism son who is 12. I have 4 wonderful, amazing, crazy, wild, strong-willed, spirited, rambunctious children. My life kind of shows the craziness of that. If you drop by my house, I'll gladly welcome you in, but it is usually messy. There's a lot going on. I am also a domestic violence survivor. And I thought that was interesting that Ann Ford mentioned that yesterday, because one situation can bleed into another situation. Just because someone has a child with a disability, they can also have another situation that carries an additional stigma with it. So I often, when I can, speak to that. People will look at me and say, well, you don't look like a domestic violence survivor. Just like the lady who said to me in Firestone, your son doesn't look like he has autism. Correct, yeah. You don't see any of those things. That's why it's so important to listen to other people's personal stories and to share your own. I have been on assistance, food stamps. I have been low income. I'm a single parent. I've been a single parent for a great part of my youngest son's life. And I'm currently standing here before you at or below poverty level. You wouldn't know it if you look at me. But that's why I want to share this story. That's why I want to be real and bring this personal story to you, because looks are deceiving. You're not going to know until you spend that time listening to that other individual. So with that, I'm going to talk quickly, give you a brief synopsis of the 4 kids, and I'm going to touch on the 4 temperaments, which is very archaic. I don't know if you remember these. The phlegmatic, the choleric, the melancholic, and the sanguine. And I don't know why I read this years and years ago, but it resonated with me to an extent that I still identify my children in that way. So first of all, we have Mike, and as I tell this story, I'm going to let you decide if you think that they have a diagnosis, and at the end you can let me know if you think I do too. Nothing has confirmed it so far. I would say that Mike is the choleric temperament. He is that irritable person, that angry sometimes person. As a child, he stood up and walked. He never crawled. As a very young child, he used to bang his head on the floor repeatedly. He loved the mall, the science center, the zoo. All of my children were born in St. Louis and lived in St. Louis until 2005 when I returned here. But I had a lot of difficulty taking him to the grocery store and to Sam's Club. And still we have a rule in our house, no Cracker Barrel. Cracker Barrel is not good for our family. He loved trains and cars, anything with wheels, and he would set up elaborate systems all over the living room floor and models, and he would bring out all of his animals from his play sets and people, and he had an entire theme going on. He spoke like an adult from the time that he could talk. He was very active and would run up and down the street as fast as he could go. He built a robot when he was, I think, 3 years old by taking apart pieces of old toys that made sounds and using my recycling. I was a big, and still am, a big tree hugger, big recycler, so there were always things in bins around the house that he could find. I homeschooled him and the children when they were very young, which worked out well for him because I knew the ebb and flow of his attention span. I knew when he could concentrate, how much he could tolerate, and when he got antsy, I could send him out in the yard and say, go run 50 laps, Mike, and then come back and we'll do the next lesson. We got quite a bit done. He hit every milestone early and on his own terms, but about second grade for him, about the time that we were adding double-digit numbers, I realized that he didn't seem to have that imaginary chalkboard everybody has in their head to carry the digit over. He was breaking pencils and throwing them at me. There was quite a bit of frustration going on. So I began to do some investigation, and through the Archdiocese of St. Louis, they did some testing and found that his cognitive ability in language and verbal skills was 120, and his cognitive ability in math was a 70. So that disparity alone caused a lot of learning problems for him, and I was quickly able to get him into special ed accredited program online and use a physical kinesthetic math program where he had manipulatives so he could see everything happening. He is diagnosed with ADHD and anxiety. Ignatius, the next one in line, he's my melancholic. He's the thinker. Nobody knows what Iggy is feeling. I even asked his sister recently because I've noticed that they've been getting along rather well lately, which is awesome because usually, siblings are fighting. And the 16 and 14-year-old have gotten very close recently. And she says, I don't know what he's thinking either. Nobody knows. Iggy is he's a grade ahead. He placed a grade ahead when we moved here. He's taking pre-calculus dual credit in high school and passing with straight A's. He loves math, anything that is logical. He's a linear thinker. If it can't be quantified, he probably doesn't want to listen to it. He can do numerous calculations in his head. He used to have rituals that he would perform at bedtime that had to be done a certain way every time. And he exhibited some anxiety in his young life. Iggy has no diagnosis. Philomena, and she goes by Nina, is my sanguine. She's my butterfly. She's flighty. She's funny. She's got a great sense of humor. She's the peacemaker of the family. So she's always making sure that everybody's okay. She talks about possibly becoming a therapist because she says as dysfunctional as our family is, I ought to be really good at it. I said, okay, you go for that. She is a prolific writer and is writing a novel for her 8th grade capstone project in a local charter school. She has no diagnosis. And then there's Gerard. Gerard is diagnosed with Asperger's, but that came much later in his life. Now, mind you, all children were high-risk pregnancies. I was starting my mothering much later in life. The husband, the father of the children, was 10 years older than me. There's been some recent research on the age of the biological father. Also on high-risk pregnancies, and there's been some research on stress during pregnancies. By far, the pregnancy with Gerard was the most difficult, the most stressful, and the highest risk. By the tail end of the pregnancy with Gerard, I knew I was in a very unsafe environment, and I knew I needed to get out. But I was receiving infusions of immunoglobulin 4 times a week in order to keep the baby alive, and I couldn't leave. So I had to concentrate on keeping him. He was born preemie, induced purposefully once we knew that his platelets were okay. He was born at 28 weeks. He was late on every milestone. At 26 months, he was not walking on his own unassisted. Now, I'm going to preface that. He learned to walk at the local domestic violence shelter here because for the first time, I had to set him down and leave him with some strangers that I didn't know in the living room because they would not allow me to have him in the sling at my side as I had done in the kitchen because there were rules about that. In preschool, he exhibited aggression and began biting other students. And we identified later on that that was because of inadequate language skills. And so, thankfully, because I had plugged myself into so many social resources, because I had to, which, by the way, is an extremely convoluted system for even the most intelligent person to attempt to navigate, let alone anyone going through a crisis. Thankfully, I'd run across Minnie O'Byrne Crisis Nursery here in town. And because they are mandated and they check over your child and all of this, they noticed some concerns and suggested that I get early intervention, so I did that. Through early intervention, they were able to teach Gerard some signs, not ASL, but some hand gestures and some signs so he could get his needs met, and that alleviated the aggression toward other children until his language skills caught up. They also taught him some gross motor skills, and that was very effective. The pediatrician, whom I consider one of the best that I could find in Springfield, never suggested an autism screening, nor did they perform an autism screening, and it wasn't on my radar. Everybody kept saying he was preemie, so he's going to hit his milestones late, don't worry about it. He had behavior that continued in school. The EI ended at 3 years old, early intervention ends, and I don't know what happened with that, but there was no transition to kind of go into regular school. So he was in a public school setting, but there were still a lot of inattention behaviors. He was running around, he was aggressive. And so around 1st grade, he was diagnosed with ADHD and anxiety by the pediatrician. So thankfully, he was at a school that was very receptive to his needs and to working with me to get his needs met. But there was no formal IEP at that time for him, but they were trying to accommodate in whatever way that they could. In June 2012, at nearly 9 years old, Gerard was finally diagnosed with Asperger's, and I had spent those 2 or 3 years in between the 2 diagnoses racking my brain and taking him to various doctors and saying, something else is going on here. Something else is happening with my son. It's not just ADHD. I've been down this road. And by the way, I did make sure that I had all of the children in therapy from the time that we got here to try to help them with some of the trauma that they've been through. But so that diagnosis for me was a relief. I finally had a name for it. I finally had 15 pages of documentation in very clinical language that told me everything about him, his cognitive abilities, his fine motor, his gross motor, his social skills, his imaginary play, and all these things. And so I felt relieved. Now I know when my first son was diagnosed with ADHD, I felt grief. And I think that a lot of parents, when they first receive a diagnosis, they're in shock. And they grieve. You grieve because you're not, it's not that, oh my gosh, my child's not normal. I don't know what normal is anymore. I believe, likewise, that everyone is different. Everyone has varying abilities of all kinds of wonderful things. But you grieve for what you imagined for your child, because every parent wants the very best for their child, and they want them to succeed. But for me, it was a relief, and thankfully I had the autism program that I was referred to for a very intensive, one-day-long diagnosis with many tests and observation, occupational therapists and speech therapists. By the way, the referral to the autism program and the clinic here in Springfield that provided that screening and diagnosis was done through a fellow parent. A doctor didn't tell me about TAP. A teacher didn't tell me about TAP. And I don't mean to tell you all the bad news. I'm going to tell you good news in a minute. But a mother did. So that's the importance of mothers sharing, of women sharing, the knowledge of men sharing their father's stories. In the fall of 2012, so this is just shortly after, Gerard brought a knife to school. And I was pulled in by the school psychologist and was told basically you have two choices. You can take your child to the emergency room for an emergency psychological evaluation and possible hospitalization, or the second choice is juvenile detention. Well, juvenile detention scared the bejeebies out of me, so I was not going down that road. So we went to the ER. And by the way, this entire time my children are all on Medicaid. So what that did was that put into play all of the systems that have to happen to get your child emergency care. So the team was brought in to do evaluation, the SAS coordinators were brought in. Meanwhile, I'm living in a world of acronyms like SAS and all these other things that I totally don't understand, but I'm trying to pull knowledge from wherever I can. Gerard was hospitalized at the local children's behavioral hospital, and he was actually there for about 6 weeks. During that time, he was there a long time. That's not typical. He was there a long time because he had developed an allergy to one of the medications, and he had blistered all over his body. The hospitalization is another traumatic event for a parent to go through. That's a locked facility. You've got certain times you can call your child. When your child's away from home, you're dealing with siblings that don't understand, or siblings that maybe are glad that, there's some peace and quiet in the house, whatever the case may be. And you've got certain times that you can go visit that child. During this time, in addition, I was finishing my master's degree in management and organizational behavior. So it was just kind of some difficult timing there, but we got Gerard through that. He came out of the hospital. Now during this time, there had not been an IEP. We were attempting to get on that road, but now he's brought a knife to school. He can't go to the school he was at. Nobody actually told me he was expelled, but obviously he could not return. So we had an emergency IEP that we had to rush through because suddenly they've got a child who obviously now has a classified disability, newly diagnosed just a few months before, and they have no place to put him. So he was placed in the only school that they had a space for him here in town, which was like a 30-minute bus ride way on the other side of town, in an LDBD classroom, self-contained. Was it good? Was it bad? It was both. In some ways, he was with children that had some other behaviors and things that probably were not a good influence for him. But I think that at the time, and with the teacher that was there, that was what he needed. The particular teacher that was there was more focusing on teaching life skills and social skills than she was any academics. Consequently, she was taken away from that school later on. I do believe that some of those kids, including my son, needed that more than they needed the academics. But he's pretty far behind as a result. After 2.5 years, he was slowly integrated into a regular classroom in that public school, and until he could tolerate being in the regular classroom full time. And then we had an IEP meeting to transition him to middle school. He was leaving 5th grade, going to go into 6th grade at his home school. So it's 6th, 7th, and 8th in this middle school in the neighborhood where I live. So now Gerard is in middle school as a 6th grader. He's failing most of his classes. I know that there are some changes that I've got to make. There are some things that are obviously not working for him, and we will be addressing those things. He was recently hospitalized again for 1 week after hearing voices in his head, which is why I teared up last night when we saw the play, and I thought to myself, is that what Gerard experiences? Is his head that noisy? Does he have, people in there, like those actors are, telling him things? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. But he is in intensive, as intensive as I can get, doctor appointments, and I'll be following up on all of that closely. At the moment, Gerard's on a whole cocktail of medications too, which has me fairly perplexed. He is on ADHD medication, which causes his anxiety to increase, so then he needs anti-anxiety meds. And if you've ever read the book about Carly's story, they talk about some of the medication issues that some of these kids go through. But the joy of Gerard is this. Gerard is very extroverted. Gerard's funny. He can be playful. And I've always said I need to get him somewhere where he can be in drama. He's a great actor. He's incredibly intelligent. So intelligent that I'm quite sure that he's got my number consistently on a number of things. He soaks up whatever environment he is around. So I need to be really careful to get him around the best environments possible. He's a little human sponge. From a young age, he didn't seem to have any fear, and it can be difficult because everyone is a friend in Gerard's world, and he just wants to be accepted and to fit in so much that he doesn't have a proper fear of situations that could bring harm to him. He also doesn't seem to know where his body is in space. He's sometimes clumsy, and the social cues don't come easily for him. What I wanted to let everybody know here today is that this isn't all that unusual of a story. I don't think. I've talked to many other mothers. And every mother, every individual, every parent of someone who has a child with a disability goes through situations and things and difficulties. The key, I think, is in sharing the hope and sharing what little piece of knowledge that you have that you could offer someone else, even if it's not the same. My son exhibits some of the same behaviors someone else's son exhibits who's nonverbal. Recently, I was afforded the opportunity to join the board of the Autism Society Central Illinois, and it's a great blessing because, like this community, even in the board meetings, it's a place where you can just be real and be honest, and we can say, hey, here we are, yeah, there's struggles every day, but you know what, I get up every day and I do the same thing all over again, and I do it the very best that I can do, and that's all any of us can do. And then to spread the word that there are things in the community for children to go to. The Autism Society Central Illinois has sensory movie. They've contracted with AMC, and they'll have movie times once a month. They might have a skating party or something else, and they're not the only organization. There's many. There are ways to get people to the resources that they need, but we need to use our mouths and our heads and the knowledge that we have stored in here from whatever personal journey we've been on to help someone else. And don't ever think that where you're at, or what you do for a living, or your little position, or maybe, well, I'm just a librarian or whatever, isn't enough. I'll tell you a quick story that just happened this past week. Presently, since the autism program of Illinois is unfunded, I've been working retail and part-time. And the other day, I had my back to the shoe department and I was putting some things on a shelf, and I heard a woman say, "Excuse me, can you help me?" And I could kind of see out of the corner of my eye a mother and a child in a stroller. And I said, "Sure." And she says, "I need to have my son's foot measured. We need to get him shoes." I said, "Sure, I'll come out and measure his foot." So as I was bending down and I was instructing him how to put his foot in there and how I could try to get the measurement, and he was all over the place, and I was saying, "Okay, honey, put your foot right here, and it needs to be all the way back." And she says, "Oh no, ma'am, he won't talk to you. My son's autistic and he's nonverbal." And I said, "Oh, my son has autism too." Voila, right there in JCPenney, in the shoe department, of all things, we've got this immediate connection. And I mean, we were talking and talking and talking, and thankfully it wasn't busy and my boss wasn't like hanging over my shoulder like the director right in the library, but it was awesome. And what happened, she told me her entire life story in like 10 minutes. She's moved here from Minnesota to be with family, to help support her. Her family doesn't understand her child with autism. She has 2 of them that are diagnosed. She's a single mother. She's living with family members. She's on food stamps. She needs help. She says, "I don't know this town. I don't know anything. I don't know anybody, and I don't know where to go." And I said, "What's your name?" And she says, "Lakeisha." And I said, "You know what, Lakeisha?" I said, "In a couple of days, I'm going to be doing a talk at this thing that we've got going on down at the museum, the state library." And I said, "Would you mind if I tell this story?" And she said, "No." I said, "I'm just going to say your first name." And she said, "Okay." I said, "You know what?" I said, "We're going to get connected, and I'll get you with some other moms. We'll find support groups in town, because I've got that knowledge. I've been down that road. And we could meet for coffee." In fact, I invited her today to the authors. I kind of looked back in the crowd, and I don't know if she was able to come. I'm sure that getting someone to watch her children is probably difficult. But I told her, I promised her, I said, "I've got your number. I'll get you all caught up as soon as it's over, and I'll be able to tell you all about it and get you pointed in the right direction." That's all it takes. That's all it takes. Tell your story. Everybody in this room has a story. Everyone here is an advocate. You're already an advocate. You're an advocate because you're here, because you care. You care enough about autism, about libraries, about helping children, about helping young people to be a part of this and to make our world better and to break down barriers and to help end stigmas. Stigmas like domestic violence or mental health or disabilities, seen or unseen. We're all just people. Humanity is worth it. tell your story. Lift someone else up. Connect them to whatever little bit of knowledge you have or you know. Give them whatever little piece of expertise you have. It could make all the difference in the world. Thanks. I don't know how we are on time, but if anybody does have any questions, I'm open to it. This is creaky.
So this is okay.
Sure.
At the last presentation, we were asked to share a success story, and I guess I'd like to share one. Because I'm autistic myself, I needed to write it out first, and that took a little while. So
Sure.
So I'll just read it to you. I am the founder and facilitator of a support self-advocacy group for adults on the autism spectrum. When I first started the group 4 years ago, several people practically lined up to tell me that I was not going to be able to do a group like that. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay. Okay. Never mind that I have a master's degree in human services and 15 years of experience running other types of support groups for issues ranging from domestic violence to substance abuse. These people could not see beyond my diagnosis. Asperger's syndrome. One of the keys to my success in life is that I've learned when to listen to people and when not to. I did not listen to these people, and I started the group. Today, the group has been running successfully for 4 years. It consistently has 10 to 15 people attending the monthly support group meetings. We have added regular recreational outings. This coming month, we will be adding life skills training conducted by an ABA therapist. We recently became a 501c3 organization and a human services cooperative. We are run by a board of directors, and 5 of 7 of the board members are on the autism spectrum. We've received grant money from several area churches, and we've also gotten hundreds of dollars from fundraisers that our young people organized themselves. Memorial Medical Center has generously offered us meeting space. We are definitely a success story, and I would love to come to local universities and our local parent autism group and tell them all